So good afternoon, everybody. It's really my pleasure to be here today. I'm going to speak in English because we have colleagues from outside. First, let me thank you, EDULOG and Fundação Belmiro de Azevedo, for the invitation to be here today. And, well, not only to be myself here today, but mainly to our international guests. They represent some of the best countries in Europe in these international large-scale assessments. And I do believe that we as Portuguese, the Portuguese education system, the policymakers, have a lot to learn from their experience and their practice. So I think more important than listen to me, probably you have read some of the things I have wrote about P's and teams and things like that. I think the most important part of this session will be to listen to our colleagues from abroad. So yeah, what can we learn from Portugal and other countries? And we are going to focus on PISA, like we did this morning. And of course, beside myself, there is Gunda Tyre from Estonia. She will speak after me. And then Hayden Clarking from Ireland. And then Pernilla Johnson from Sweden. So we start with PISA, and it's quite nice to, talk in the afternoon after Luis, because next slide we can just skip it, because Luis showed something really similar to this. I'm just going to say that, the main focus of PISA, and that is a criticism that, I think has some reason to be. It's science literacy and reading literacy and mathematics literacy. Don't worry if you cannot read the definitions. You can see that later on the Foundation website. But what is really important, just to justify the methodology that I'm going to follow, is that the correlation between the three major domains is quite strong. So the correlation square is 0.9. And that means that, instead of doing like Luis did this morning, looking at mathematics and science and literacy, we can actually justify from a strictly psychometrics point of view that there is this PISA literacy that is just the average of these three ones. And, there is, of course, more reliability when we compare three measures for something than we just look at one. So I'm going just to show you results for the average of these three domains, okay? And if you are interested on the psychometrics, I can explain you how that works later. So in 2022, PISA tries to assess world literacy, and we got 81 countries participating. 690,000 students, more than 500,000, and very interesting results. 31% of the students did not reach basic mathematics proficiency levels. And basic mathematics proficiency levels for PISA is like the ability to read a table, like a timetable for, for the buses or for the trains, or doing very simple calculations. So I think this is quite worrisome, because 1/3 of our young people from around the world cannot do these basic mathematics skills. Probably you are thinking, yeah, okay, but what about Portugal? It's also 1/3. So you saw in the morning that in 2022, Portugal is really well aligned with the OECD average. And that means that the results that are valid for the OECD, they are pretty much the same for Portugal. The situation is a little bit better in science and reading, but even so, 1 out of 4 students cannot, again, reach the basic reading and science proficiency levels. So this means that they have trouble in, reading a short text and understanding what is the message of the short text. And this is quite worrisome, because, as you can see, probably better on the next slide, there is a huge variability around the world. So if we focus in South America, let me talk about the PISA scale before, so that you can understand the colors. So PISA has this unique score scale that goes from 0 to 1,000 points, with an average middle point of 500. So when PISA started on the first edition, the test was designed so that an average student from the OECD will get a score of 500 with a standard deviation of 100 points. That means that 95% of the students from the OECD, when PISA started in 2000, should get a score somewhere between 200 points and maximum 800 points. If you look at the top 3 countries in the world, we start with Singapore. All of them are from Southeast Asia with 560 points. And probably say, well, you know, okay, so they are above the average of the scale, that's good. But let me finish to see what is the message that I want to convey. And then you have Macau, a former Portuguese not colony, territory, and then of course Taiwan. And if you look at the bottom 3, you got Kosovo, you got the Dominican Republic, and you got Cambodia. And if you look at the score from Cambodia, it's 337 points. And if you compare with Singapore, 560, this is like 230 points difference. So what does this mean in terms of education of these students? Well, in the PISA scale, 25 points corresponds to 1 year of schooling. 1 year for 25 points. So 230 points is like 8 years of schooling. What I'm saying is that, you know, the difference in the world are so striking that bottom performers and top performers, they are separated by almost 8 years of schooling. And of course, as you heard this morning, all these are for 15 years old. So it's quite concerning if you think in the development of the world as a whole, if you think about all the geopolitical problems that we are facing today around the world, you'll find explanation on these discrepancies in education. And of course, the question is, what can explain this? Why is the world so different? In Europe, you see that we are pretty much on the green side of the scale, so we are a little bit above the 500 points. Actually, the center of the scale here is not the 500 points, but it's actually the average of OECD on 2022, so it's 470 something. So in Europe, we are quite well, the United States, Canada, Australia, but if you go to South America or to Africa, actually, we only have Morocco in Africa. It has nothing to do with my name. You see that, and also if you go to Asia, you see that the results there are quite weak. So there is a source of concern for these inequalities around the world. And of course, the question is why? What can explain this discrepancy? And I have some ideas that I'm going to share with you. And then, of course, we are open for discussion. And the first one is human development. So this Human Development Index, it's an index developed by the United Nations. And actually, it's just, you know, a weighted average of the gross domestic product of the countries, life expectancy, and the percentage of population with secondary education. And you see that, you know, countries that always get the best results, like Japan and Singapore and Hong Kong and Korea and Canada, they have, of course, societies more developed and a population with more health and more education. So, yeah, money plays a role, of course, education plays a role, of course. Luis talked about that this morning for Portugal. But is it really the amount of money that countries spend? Actually, let me just go back and say that from a statistical point of view, we are really always concerned about this. The R square is 0.70. That means that this Human Development Index explains 70% of the difference between the countries, of the variation between the countries. So it's quite a lot in education. But if we go to the amount that each country invests in education, I'm not going to say that it spends, because I strongly believe that money spent in education is an investment, not a cost. You see that now the square correlation is 0.07. So only 7% of the variation between countries can be explained by the amount as percentage of the GDP that the country spends on education. Of course, there is, you know, a positive correlation. In principle, you will expect that countries that spend more will have better results. But it's not really the amount that you spend, as this graph shows, but how you spend it. And so we need to look at other variables. You know, we are assessing students. What about the effort that the students put on in the test? And this graphic is quite interesting, because this is a PISA item that is called the thermometer item, where the PISA test asks the student if they would spend more effort in the PISA test if the test counted for their final grades, for their final marks. As probably you know, PISA has no effect on the final marks of the students, neither internal classifications or final classifications or whatever. And so there is this concern about the validity of, the PISA test, and if it is actually a valid and reliable instrument to measure what the students know, knowing that, there will be no consequences for the student taking the test. And these results are quite interesting, because if you look at Singapore is up here in the top, or if you look at Ireland and Hong Kong that are quite here, about every 4 students that took the test said, no, I'm just taking this for fun. I would spend more effort if the test counted for my final grade. On the other way, if you look at countries with lower results, like Albania, or the Dominican Republic, that is one of the bottom 3, the students actually say that they put as much effort in the PISA test as if the test counted for their final grades. So, even if they are just doing the test for fun, these guys from Southeast Asia, from Estonia, from Ireland, from Sweden, they are doing the test for fun, but they are performing quite well. So this means that, there is no stress, probably no stress involved in taking the test. But even so, these students have knowledge and skills that allow them, even that they are not taking the test very seriously, to get quite good results. So what could explain this? One of the strongest variables that can explain this at the family level is, of course, the family economic and socio-cultural status. This means the resources that the students have at home to help learning. So it's kind of home resources for learning. And of course, countries that have families with more resources for learning, they got better results. So so the human development of the country counts. Student motivation also counts, and of course, student skills and knowledge. But really, as we saw for Portugal, and Portugal is somewhere around here, as we saw for Portugal, it's important what is the economic background of families, and how this affects not only the results, but the expectations that the kids have, and the parents have on the level of education that the kids are supposed to get when they finish all their schooling. What about system and countries measures? So what can explain this difference between the countries if we look at systems accountability? This next figure is could be a little bit misleading, because this is actually after the COVID pandemic, so it's PISA results from 2022, and we have 3 groups of countries here. The first one had no exams, and by exams I mean high-stakes assessments that have consequences for the students. And you can see Portugal here. This is exams at the end of the lower secondary, grade 9. And of course Portugal has I'm kind of troubled to say if we have high-stake exams or not. Now we have, but like in 2022 and 2020 and 2019 we did not. But some countries here never had exams at the end of lower secondary, at grade 9. So this group over here, they had exams, but they had to delay the exams, or they had to make some alterations to accommodate the fact that schools were closed for some times. And then the third group is the group that, just keep business as usual with high-stakes assessments. And as you can see, or probably can see because the colors are not really well chosen, this is the median of the group that had no exams. Portugal is over there. This is the median of the group that, had keep the exams, but had to do some adaptations. And this is the group that, the median of the group that keep the exams as business as usual. And you probably remember this from your Stats 101 classes. The differences are quite statistically significant. And countries with accountability measures, either adapted due to the COVID pandemic or just business as usual, get, of course, significantly higher results than countries that don't have these student accountability measures. So, this could be some variables that can explain the difference that we see between the countries. And of course, after the presentation, we can discuss these and talk about some other variables. I've been researching these not only for PISA, but also for teams. And so I can tell you about some other variables that are important here. For example, schools. But the overall trend for OECD, and that's now where we are moving, it's this one here. So we get this linear trend of decreasing. So again, let me just remember you that these points, it's not mathematics or science or reading, it's the average of the tree, okay? And yeah, so we got this decreasing trend. This big drop, it has been associated with the COVID lockdown in most of the OECD countries. And again, if we focus in Europe, here are the top performers, Estonia. Actually, it's the seventh top performer in the world, but in Europe is the first one. And then Ireland, and then Switzerland. And then in the bottom, we got Romania, Bulgaria, and Albania, so these countries here in this cluster. And Portugal is, quite well, as Luis was showing this morning, quite in the average of OECD, a little bit above the middle point of the scale. So, before introducing my colleagues in the panel, let me show you some data from Estonia. And I think it's really interesting, and Gunda Tyre is going to explain these results in more detail. It's a quite small country, probably you know that where this is. Gund, I still remember that it's 1,000 kilometers from Estonia to Portugal. Yeah, so it's a quite small country, just 1.35 million inhabitants. Not very rich, 38.1 billion GDP. It invests about 6% of GDP in education. And so these are Estonia results. They started not very well, but then they rose, and they kept themselves here. And then on the last edition of the PISA test, Gunda can explain if that was due to the school closure because of the COVID pandemic, or if there is some other factors. But Gunda, what we're really interesting to know is what explains this race here and how you managed to keep yourself on the top position of Europe for 4 cycles. So it's 15 years almost, 14 years being a top performer in Europe. And that's quite astounding for a country so small with such a small population to get these results. And then we moved to Ireland. And as you know, probably Ireland was also under the rule of the Troika. And so they have also financial aid. And it's also a quite small country as compared to Portugal, just 5.1 million inhabitants. The gross domestic product, you'll see it's much better than Portugal. And it doesn't spend, or it doesn't invest very much on their education, just 3% of the GDP. And the nice story about Ireland is that, they started like OECD, going down. And then after 2009, they had some policy change, and, they had a big jump. And they've been decreasing slowly. But the question for Ireland to start is, while most of the countries in the OECD had a big drop from 2018 to 2022, and as I said, this has been explained mainly by the school closure due to COVID, Ireland actually was able to keep their scores. And Ireland, as Portugal, closed the schools for, on average, 180 days for the 2 years of the COVID pandemic. So although they closed the schools for as long as Portugal, they were actually able to maintain the performance of the students. So, Hayden, we really want to know what is your secret. Okay, then we move to Sweden, and again, it's a very interesting case study in Europe. Sweden, it's a much larger country than Portugal, but pretty much has the same number of inhabitants, 10.5. The gross domestic product is one of the best in Europe. It invests about 6.7% of the GDP in education. And Sweden is a quite interesting country because, again, it started like the average of the OECD, decreasing quite dramatically. And then, after 2012, they were able to invert and start growing. However, from 2018 to 2022, there is also a big drop that is aligned with the drop in OECD. So Pernilla, the question for you is, well, but Sweden didn't close the schools due to the COVID pandemic. So it was one of the fewest countries in Europe that actually kept the schools open. So if the drop in OECD is because of the school closure, why is the drop in Sweden if the schools did not close? So yeah, you have to stay too, because I think there will be quite interesting answers for all these secrets that we can learn too. So yeah, last but not least, let's go to Portugal. So as you know, we got 10.4 million inhabitants, so pretty much the same thing as Sweden. However, our gross domestic product is about half, and we spend about 4.7% of our GDP in education. Portugal, as Luis was saying, it was a case study for the OECD because from 2000, where we ranked third from the bottom, yeah, third from the bottom, Portugal actually rose above the OECD average in 2015 if we look at this PISA literacy. So if you look at just the math scores and if you look at reading scores and science, the trend is not exactly like that one. So there was a kind of stable result from 2015 to 2011. But again, if you just average the three literacies, Portugal rose above the OECD average in 2015 and then start decreasing to 2018, and from 2018 and 2022 there was also a big drop, larger than the OECD average, as Luis was saying this morning. However, if you look at the three domains combined, it's pretty much the same thing. So we are pretty much aligned with the OECD. And well, what can explain this evolution? So if you were here this morning, you heard Luis talking about the education level of the parents and how it can predict or not. So after the talk, me and Luis, we did a bet. So he has these optimistic predictions. I hope he wins. My predictions are pessimistic, but we bet how much it was, Luis. Where is Luis? I can see. Oh, it's over there. 1 million euros, right? Yeah, so you have to come here to the EDULOG 2026 conference to see who wins the bet. But anyway, my personal reading of the Portuguese results and what explains the evolution of Portugal, both the positive and negative, has to do with this. So, as I said, we started in the bottom of the scale in 2000. 2000, I'm just, of course, for those of you that are Portuguese, you know what these roles means, right? I'm not trying to politicize this presentation. I'm just going to show that it didn't really matter what was the political color, because there was a set of education policies that were aligned, independent of what was the party in the ruling. But in 2000, the mean income of households was 25.4 thousand euros. Tertiary education, only 13% of the population had a college degree. 13%, 1-3. Upper secondary schooling was 56.8%, so about half of the population, and preschool coverage was 73.3%. So 3 out of each 4 kids in Portugal were actually in preschool. And yeah, the results in the first edition of PISA was quite bad, but the investment was in the education was not that bad, 4.8% of the GDP. And after the first PISA results, the Ministry of Education at that time, I'm not going to say the names, but he thought that it was supposed to have more information on the Portuguese system and that we need to reinforce our curriculum for primary education. We started with primary education, mainly for math and Portuguese. And so, yeah, that's a criticism that we can get to PISA. So PISA focused on reading, Portuguese, in our case, mathematics and science. And so it seems that the policies are always aligned with science, mathematics, and Portuguese. What about the other subjects? Yeah. Okay, so then to 2003, we saw a quite interesting raise, 11 points. the expenditure in education actually increased to 5.1 and then start decreasing. And then we have an orange government, orange color. Not going to say who was the Minister of Education in that period. There is a strong light, I can see him here. But again, you look at the PISA results and thought that, we really need more information in our system. So we started these low-stake exams for grade 9 in mathematics and Portuguese. And you can ask, what about the other disciplines? Yes, you can ask him, what about the other ones? And then in 2005, these low-stake exams with no consequences for the student changed to high-stake exams. So they were accounting like for, I don't exactly remember, 30% or 25% of the final grade. And mainly families and teachers were getting quite stressed because they thought that, if our kids, our students, or our sons and daughters get like a low score on the national exam, they will fail the year. And, being worth 25% or even 30%, a student with a GPA of 3 points will have to have 1 in the exam to fail that course. So it was not really high stakes. So it was not really all or nothing. It was just 25%. The kids have to have, a really bad day to go from a 3.0 GPA to a 1.0. And that's when they will fail the course. If they had like a GPA of 4 or 5 points, the Portuguese colleagues know that for these lower secondary grades go from 1 to 5. So if they had like a GPA of 5, there is no way they could fail the course and the year. Yeah, so in the next edition of PISA, that was just 1 year after, we didn't see any big change. So actually we went down 1 point. And then again, a different political color. I'm not going to say who was the Minister of Education at that time, but she, actually I'm giving clues, right, but actually she looked at the PISA results and figured out something that we were seeing from the first edition, that, the socioeconomic level of the parents and especially of the places where the schools were located could have a strong impact on students' performance. And so one of the policies was to create these low socioeconomic territories, in Portuguese the type, territórios de intervenção educativa prioritária, ou qualquer coisa assim, não me lembro do nome. And she started a math action plan, proposed new math and Portuguese curriculum, again expanding the curriculum, reinforcing the contents and setting targets and goals, and started a national reading plan. And in the next cycle of PISA, Portugal had the biggest increase ever. So before you're thinking about causal inferences, let me say that, as Luis said this morning, and everybody else says, PISA is just a correlational study. So this is not experimental. We can't really say that, this is due to this policy or that policy. We can see policy changes and we can see results changing. And then we can say, well, there is a positive correlation or a negative correlation. And, if there is a causal effect, there will be a correlation, but you can have a correlation with no causal effects. It could be just factual. It could be something else. But, there is an association. Anyway, so then again we change color. And a new Minister of Education that looked very much into the PISA results, not only PISA, but also teams. And this was a quite difficult period for Portugal. This extended hand with a hero just means that, Portugal had to be bailed out by a troika of the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. Of course, you all remember this. And so it was a quite difficult period. You see that during this last socialist part of the government, there was an increase in education, pretty much to the same level in 2000. And then the Troika, and well, you know how hard it was to adapt to all the rules and regulations. But so we get a little bit going down on the PISA literacy. And investment went down also on the first year of the Troika intervention. And then we have a set of policies again bringing more accountability to the students. So this new Minister of Education in 2012, he started the high-stake exams for grade 6 at Math and Portuguese, extra teaching hours for Math, Portuguese, and Science. So there was this recommendation that there should be at least this amount of hours for Portuguese and Science and per week to be taught in schools. And then in 2013, he started high-stake exams on grade 4, again on Math and Portuguese. And you could ask, what about the other subjects? Reinforcement of school autonomy. There was these credit hours for schools that were doing better on the national exams, so they could invest more resources into improve the students' performance. And actually, in this period, we saw a small raise in the investment in education, despite being under the influence of the Troika and had to account every centime that we spent overall as a country. And in 2014, a measure that was quite controversial, although it was not really his idea, this teacher selection exam, I'm sorry, I have to point here. Teacher selection exam was actually taught here, but not implemented, but in 2014 it was implemented. It only lasted for 2 years, not really 2 complete years, 2 full years. And then there was this teaching and learning targets. So students had these documents, or teachers had these documents that the students have to achieve these levels of knowledge. And the expansion of the professional and vocational offer, who this morning showed the graph where you see this big rise in offer and the number of students applying for these tracks. And then we got the second biggest rise in the PISA scores. This was 2015, as I said. This was the year, if we look at the PISA literacy, this was the year where Portugal was above the OECD average. And then, another call it change. And again, a new set of education policies. And the first thing that was done in terms of education policy in the beginning of 2016 was just to revert some of the measures from the previous government. So the high-stake exams for grade 6 were cancelled. The high-stake exams for grade 4 were cancelled. Everything on January 2016. And then the teacher selection exam also cancelled. Okay, but there was more. So there was this curricular flexibility. And for our international colleagues that probably don't know what this is, it just means that groups of teachers at schools, for example, the Math group, the Portuguese group, could look at the official curriculums that were still implemented, that were not reversed, and actually decide, in their opinion, what was important that the students should learn. So they could pick the subjects that they want to teach. And then results start decreasing. Just a decrease of 5 points is not a tragedy. But anyway, that's what happened. And then in 2018, there was this 21st century student profile saying that, by the end of mandatory schooling, students should be able to do this and do that. So the curricular goals that were set like a few years before at each grade, now it just moved to the end of the mandatory education. And there was this essential learning new programs that, again, were aimed at trimming the Math and Portuguese contents and also the other disciplines. For example, colleagues that teach history complain a lot that, contents from history were really trimmed to more than essential learnings in history. And then there was this emphasis on citizenship and development. So less emphasis in Math and Portuguese, more emphasis in social science. And then information is required, so they started low-stake exams. Not for the grades by the end of the cycles, so no assessment for grade 4 or grade 6, but at the middle of the cycles, because the idea was that, we need information at the middle of the cycle, so if we find out that students are doing poorly, we can still intervene and recover their learnings before they end up the cycle. And then, then we got the COVID, school closure. In average, for the 2 years, Portugal closed schools for 180 days, like Ireland. And there was a little bit increase in investment, so just 0.2 percentage points, but anyway, it improved. And then decreased again when the schools opened. And in 2022, you probably still remember these results, there was this huge drop. And it actually, in 2022, the knowledge of the Portuguese students as measured by PISA. Remember that I explained, and Luis also explained that in the morning, that PISA major domains are reading, mathematics, and science. Of course, there are other subjects that are important in school, but that's what PISA assesses. In 2022, our Portuguese students went to the level of 2007, 2008. So there was a drop of almost 16 years. So my point in showing you the colors, as I said, was not trying to politicize the presentation, but just to show you that between 2000 and 2015, independent of the government color, there was a quite nice alignment of education policies, always focusing on reinforcing the curriculum, reinforcing the teaching hours, getting goals and targets for the student learning, getting accountability for the students. And we had this improvement. No other example in OECD. Portugal was actually showing up as, this case of success story in all the PISA reports in 2015 and 2018. But after 2015, there was a change in policy, kind of contradicting everything that was done until 2015. So curricular flexibility, forget about structured curriculum, let teachers choose what they think it's important to teach. Let's stream curriculums, because the idea was that, the curriculums are very large and students cannot learn everything, so it's better to learn less and remember what they learned than to try to learn a lot of things. And then more emphasis on less hard sciences, like, for example, the new documents for the essential learning says that there is no minimum amount for teaching Portuguese and mathematics per hour, per week. There is just this fixed amount. So it's like 9 hours, period. Before it was at least 9 hours. So it means that it had to be 9 or more. And then instead of having, high-stake assessments, we had low-stake assessments. And unfortunately, I was kind of predicting these results. And unfortunately, I think I was right. But I will let you contradict me and say, no, it has nothing to do with education policies. Maybe, as Luis was saying, it's just that families are getting healthier. The tertiary education now, it's almost 50%, so 1 in every 2 adults have a college degree. Upper secondary schooling went to 86%, okay? And preschool coverage is 96.2. And all these variables, as we showed this morning, they have been shown consistently across countries all over the world, that they are strong predictors of what students can do in PISA and TIMSS. However, as Luis was showing, the level of tertiary education and upper secondary schooling has been increasing continuously since 2000. So that could be I believe, quite explanatory factor up to 2015. But then education of parents and income of families kept increasing. But the PISA results, and not PISA, also TIMSS and PEARLS. TIMSS assesses, for those of you that do not know, TIMSS assess mathematics and science at grade 4 and also at grade 8, but Portugal only did grade 8 on the last edition, 2019, and PEARLS is for reading at grade 4. And so I think that, although the family education level was increasing, its effect on the students' literacy was not strong enough to be to overcome what I think it's the policy effect. So if you ask me, policy does matter. Okay. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to present. So next I'm going to ask Gunda Tyre to come here to give her talk and tell what is the Estonian secrets. What can we copy from them? Gunda, the stage is yours. Thank you.